Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, welcome to this year's IoTSF Annual Conference. My name is Stephen Pattison. I'm the chairman of IoTSF and I also work for ARM. It's my great pleasure to start this year's conference with an overview of where we are in the world of IoT security. This, as you know, is the first time we've done a virtual conference, and I can assure you, you are not alone if you're watching this. We have had a large number of people register to attend, and I hope you will find it profitable and inspiring. My title today is We're All in This Together. And that should be self-evident, but I hope in the next few minutes to take you through some of the angles around security, some of its complexities, in order to show that actually this really is going to need to be a team effort, and to show that IoTSF is ideally placed to bring together the expertise, the resources, the experiences that we all need if we're going to solve this problem. I'm going to start with a question that you may think seems a bit silly. Do you feel safer now than you did a year ago? Well, you know, it is a silly question really, because we've had obviously an extraordinary and in some ways terrible year as a result of the pandemic. But I picked up the newspaper, the Times of London, last week, and just flicking through it, I found three headlines. The first, deadly shark attack makes this year worse since 1929. It refers to a story from Western Australia where a person was the word they always use is mauled. What they mean is kind of chewed, eaten, bitten by a shark, but mauled to death by a shark last week. And that person's death, sadly, made this year the worst year for shark-related deaths since 1929. I should add, in case you think this is a very big problem, that there were, I think, 8 deaths this year, and in 1929 there had been 9. More expectedly, another headline reported in the UK, the current running total of deaths related to COVID-19. That has become a regular feature of our lives this year. Sadly, unfortunately, and tragically for many. And then the last headline at the bottom here, all these found in the newspaper on the same day. Smart doorbells can let hackers into your home. And that draws on a report by the UK Consumer Association, which, and it's a reminder that actually, despite the extraordinary events of this year, the problem of IoT security has not gone away. There has been no let-up in the struggle to fight vulnerabilities and bad actors. So that Which report I just mentioned was the second report they had produced in a few months, in October, which looked at some smart plugs. And they found, and 10 plugs, they found 13 vulnerabilities, including serious ones, including one that risked causing a fire in people's homes. So you've got that couple of Which reports already this year, focusing on these outstanding problems. And then I thought I'd reference the IoTSF Vulnerability Disclosure Report. Now, later this week, you will hear that the new disclosure report is coming out with new figures, and I won't preempt an announcement on that. But the previous report, over 85% of companies did not have a disclosure policy. And disclosure policies are a key part of some of this, because this whole struggle is going to be a continuous evolution, and we need to make sure we have companies properly able and willing to listen to and investigate reports of new vulnerabilities. And finally, I've put in at the bottom here the UK's National Cyber Security Centre published its report just a few weeks ago. And they're not just looking at IoT security, they're looking at a whole range of cyber security incidents. And typically they're looking at the big ones. But the stark figure from here was that last year the NCSC investigated the highest number of incidents since they were created. They were created 3 or 4 years ago. And obviously no one expected that simply by creating another bit of government, the problem would go away. But this shows, again, that the struggle against vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and bad actors doesn't stop. So why is the situation not better? We've been talking about security in this context for a while now, but somehow, we're still not really covering every base. And I think you can sum it up the way I've tried to sum it up in this slide. An inconsistent approach to security is industry's biggest challenge to solving this problem. You've got lots of people out there, lots of products, lots of motivations to get to market quickly, to get their product out, to keep costs down, let's admit it. And sometimes, not infrequently, the issue of security is not front of mind. And you've got some people doing it well and some people doing it less well. And that's the problem. Now, of course, everyone would admit that security is a complex issue. I shall say later that actually it's not quite as complex as we might think. And these days we've got tools, including IoTSF, to help people manage it. But let's face up to it. It does require a bit of thought. I mean, I'll just put this down as an example. I mean, quite a lot of people might say, well, security it's about encryption, isn't it, really? But it's not. Of course, it's not just about encryption, and it's not just about software or hardware. It's about both. It's about hardware and software. And you can, of course, you can take an encryption layer and put it on your product. But if there are weaknesses elsewhere, a hacker will get in, will exploit them. So what we need to make sure is that security and trust are established within every layer of the product and its connectivity. And that probably means that you, the product developer, need other people to help. You need to be able to rely on a supply chain, an ecosystem that's going to be taking this problem just as seriously as you, and on whom you can rely for each part of that ecosystem to do their bit in trying to make sure that the end product is as secure as you can reasonably expect. And some of this, I'm going to suggest today, is a bit about maturity. I mentioned earlier that one of the features, and one of the great features of the business we're all in, is innovation, the speed of innovation, wave after wave of innovation, and the imagination and creativity of all those companies trying to find ways of using new technological capabilities to produce new products, new services, to devise new things that will be attractive to a new market. And there's an example here. You want to make a coffee machine smart, so you add a microcontroller to it, and it's got a smart coffee machine, and it does all sorts of things. And you're thinking, this is great. We can offer a whole range of new services linked to this coffee machine. With luck, there are whole new business models attached to it. You can start to offer its users a wider variety of services and products, and tailor the offers according to how they're using the machine, and so on and so forth. It's a great thing, great possibility. But the person who's making, the company that's making the coffee machine, probably is not an expert in connectivity or IoT devices. They probably don't have that sort of digital maturity that means that they are able to look round corners, to turn over stones, see what's underneath, and actually to move up from making ordinary analog devices, if you like, to providing devices that include a digital component and can offer digital services. And this isn't a criticism, it's a reflection on an industry which is, in some ways still a bit adolescent. It's still growing up. It hasn't yet reached maturity. And, one of the things about people who reach maturity, it is said, and I'm still hoping to discover this, is that you get with maturity a bit of self-awareness, a bit of an ability to look under the hood and to look round corners and to know what your weaknesses are and to want to do something about them. So I think we do need to recognise that this isn't simply about bad actors. It isn't simply about negligence, if you like. It isn't simply about willful attempts to exploit consumers or customers, but it is probably a product of this exciting rush to innovate and create. And we need to make it much easier for those people to be able to understand the security dimensions of their new products and to do something about them. Now, I'm often asked about the business case for security, and we've talked about this often in the past, but it bears repeating. The question sometimes put, well, if consumers really wanted security, they would be demanding it. They would be asking for it. They would be insisting on it. They would be doing the research. But the research that's been done about consumers suggests that, yes, they do care about security, but they assume that security is already taken care of for them. They assume that the products they're buying already meet certain security standards, or they wouldn't be offered for sale, is what they think. So we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that consumers are not bothered, therefore why should business be bothered? Consumers are bothered, and in some cases they are under the misconception that products are more secure than they actually are. And the trouble with that is that it's building up a risk. It's building up a huge risk, and we see it from time to time in some of the stories of hacking and data theft that take place. The risk is that when consumers find out that their products are not as secure as they thought, there is a backlash. And there's a reputational risk to companies who are involved, to the particular companies who are involved, but there's also a reputational risk to the, if you like, the sector as a whole, to the IoT sector as a whole. And we must make sure we are looking ahead, anticipating that risk, and trying to do what we can to make sure that companies and the sector don't get left high and dry if the public suddenly discover that what they've been buying is not as secure as they thought and they no longer trust it. And of course, that brings us to regulation, right? We've been talking about regulation for a while. It comes closer and closer. Regulation will undoubtedly also be a driver for better security. But it doesn't solve the problem. Regulation on its own won't solve the problem. Regulation typically will be at a fairly high level, and it will be up to companies and the ecosystem to deliver the outcomes sought by regulation through offering easy ways, simple ways in which the ecosystem can put those regulatory formulae into practice with minimal fuss and minimal divergence and maximum consistency and simplicity. And what we've seen, certainly over the past year, is a growing trend towards basic agreement on what the key building blocks of security are in those jurisdictions that are looking at regulation most seriously. And you can see it in the material that's coming out of Europe, in ETSI, the ETSI standards that were published this year, that started as an effort by the UK and has now been adopted into an ETSI IoT consumer security standard, and very similar provisions coming out of NIST in Washington with its baseline requirements. And you're getting people beginning to look at regulation, even in the United States. In the closing weeks of the current administration, the Congress has adopted legislation that would require federal procurement of IoT products to meet the NIST standards. And that's a very characteristic way in which the US federal government tries to drive up standards. It, if you like, mandates certain practices for the federal government in the full knowledge that those practices are quite likely to be adopted much more widely across the United States, i.e. not just limited to the federal government's procurement practices. In the UK, there is talk about regulation. Maybe next year, 2021, it might slip because, as everywhere, governments have a lot on their plates at the moment, but it will certainly come. We've seen a voluntary labelling scheme introduced this year in Singapore, and there are various other bits. And in fairness, the sort of IoT security ecosystem has got behind some of these moves in the regulatory environment. It's helping to inform what's going on. It's also helping to, as I say, translate some of these regulatory concepts into practical advice. And so regulation will help. It will help drive up security. My own belief is that we cannot afford to wait, and that we are taking a risk. The sector is taking a risk if it takes the view that consumers don't care and therefore we can wait until we are forced by regulation to do something about this. And I think the two things are coming together. The risk, as I say, that consumers won't trust the products and the move towards regulation are coming together. And if we're smart, we will be ready for it in advance. This is, if you like, the key slide, and I'm not going to go through it all. I put a lot of words on it. And it's the message, we're all in this together. Or as, and I take the phrase from National Cybersecurity Centre's website, it's cybersecurity, it's a team sport. And I couldn't resist the kind of pun there about this year, at least. It's not been much of a contact sport, but actually let's reflect and say that, you know, given that we've all had to work virtually, or almost all of us have had to work virtually, we've all done pretty well at keeping this going, at making sure that we're able to keep up to the mark with the security challenges and the advice we offer. But it's the size of this slide that's really important. And on the column, some of the players, headed some of the players, it's some of the people really, some of the types of people who are or should be involved in the effort to drive IoT security. And they're all the sorts of people you would expect. They come from different layers of business, but they also come from different sectors, government, academics, innocent bystanders, experts of all sorts. Um, and they involve the people who will challenge us, the pen testers, and they involve the people who will help our engineers deal with these problems in the future, the trainers. All of these people have a part to play. And in the column headed More of the Players, this is more about both organizations, but also about concepts and approaches. So, loads of different types of organizations are involved: distributors, retailers, standards bodies, and so on. Consumer associations I've already mentioned, who I think can play an increasingly important role in helping to drive up awareness of the need for security. And then there are some concepts. We need to bring in those people who are experts in offering assurance. Some would call it certification, but let's stop short of certification and just call it assurance that products do meet certain key criteria. And then those right at the bottom of that list, who are working in different areas. Smart buildings is an area which IoTSF has been working a lot on and about which you'll hear more later, and also application security and the whole secure by design movement. And then, of course, it's a global effort. Some of the countries I mentioned there are working in this area. So, we're all in this together. We all need to work together. And even if we can't go physically to the conferences and the face-to-face meetings and the seminars and listen to the papers and the experts and chat in the margins as we used to do, we too, as people interested in driving security, should not let up. We should continue to make sure that we are working together despite the circumstances to continue to drive all of this forward. And IoTSF is a great umbrella for all of this. IoTSF is a big tent. All of these people and others, too numerous to mention, not on this slide, are invited to be involved, get involved, and help. We don't have, if you like, proprietary pride. Yes, we're proud of what we've done, but we're also open to, if you like, our own view of vulnerability disclosure. We're also open to new people coming and talking to us and helping to shape the way we develop our products and advice and the way we inform the regulatory debate right across the world. And we are, next year, you will see us making it even easier for people right across the world to get involved. What we'll be trying to do next year is to set up a global network which is going to be built around chapters in different countries or maybe different cities even of the same country, where companies who are members of IoTSF can come together and talk about the local issues which are important to them on this agenda. And they can hear from local experts about what's going on, and they can network locally about how to improve their products and services. And so I admit it, I've copied a slogan here: act local, think global. Is one of the approaches we will be exploring next year. So if you are interested in helping with a local chapter, please bear this in mind. As I say, it'll be the first quarter of 2021 before we're in a position really to start to pull this together. But please don't hesitate to express your interest and let us know, and we'll find out how you can best help and get involved. Those of you who were here last year will remember that I started last year's conference with a fairy story. I think it was the Three Little Pigs. I'm not going to tell that story again. And I just thought that as a result this year I would end with a fairy story. And this is the well-known fairy story. It's a European story which I suppose was collected by the German brothers Grimm when they did their great collection of fairy stories in the early 19th century. And I'm not going to tell the story. It's Little Red Riding Hood. Uh, it's about a little girl who wears red, which is why it's called Little Red Riding Hood. And she's basically persuaded by a wolf to delay her regular journey to visit her grandmother so that the wolf can go ahead of her and gobble up the grandmother, take the grandmother's place in bed in the house, and then when the little girl comes, he gobbles her up as well. But one of the interesting bits is that when the little girl gets to the grandmother's house and she sees what purports to be the grandmother, she's suspicious. She says to the grandmother, "What a deep voice you've got, grandmother, today." And the wolf says very quickly, "Oh, that's the voice I use to say I love you," or words to that effect. You know, and she says, "What big eyes you've got. Your eyes look big." "Oh, that's all the better to see how lovely you are," says the wolf, and so on. And the point about that is that, you know, Little Red Riding Hood is a bit suspicious, but she's fobbed off. And I think that could be a metaphor for some consumer engagements or customer engagements with the digital world. You know, we're not quite sure about it, but we don't know enough really to ascertain what's going on, and therefore we sort of go along with it. And if we're not careful, we end up like poor Little Red Riding Hood, eaten by the wolf. In some versions of the story, I should add, for those who are of delicate disposition, the wolf gets killed and his stomach is opened, and both Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother step out of his stomach alive and well. But let's not allow the world of IoT security to lead to such drastic outcomes. Let's try to make sure that we don't fall into the Little Red Riding Hood trap, that we are asking questions and we're expecting serious answers and we're looking round corners and we are working together to try to make this better. We're all in this together. Let's not forget it. Let's pull together. I hope, I'm sure you will have a great conference. There are lots of great talks this year. The advantage of it being virtual is that you can dip in and out. Please do so. It's great to have you all with us. Thank you very much.